Hello, and welcome. I invite you to settle in, to clear some space not just in your schedule, but in your mind. Because today, we are going to journey back in time, not to a story that is neat and tidy, with clear heroes and obvious miracles, but to a story that is messy, complex, and frighteningly real. We are going to walk the opulent and treacherous halls of a pagan palace, and we are going to explore the book of Esther in a way that I hope will feel like you are hearing it for the very first time. Most of us know the Sunday school version, don't we? There's a brave and beautiful Jewish queen, a villain who twirls his mustache, a foolish king, and a wise uncle. It's a story of courage, a story about standing up for your people, culminating in that famous, inspiring line, "For such a time as this." And all of that is true. It's a good story, but it is not the whole story. It's not even the most interesting part of the story. The true genius, the breathtaking mystery of the book of Esther, lies not in what is said, but in what is not said. It lies in a silence that is so profound, so intentional, that it becomes the loudest thing in the entire narrative. What am I talking about? I'm talking about the fact that in the entire book of Esther, the name of God is never mentioned. Not once. There are no burning bushes, no parting of the Red Sea, no prophets hearing a booming voice from heaven. There is no prayer explicitly recorded, no mention of the law, no reference to the covenant. If you were to read this story for the first time, you might think it was purely a secular account of political intrigue, ethnic tension, and sheer, dumb luck. And that is precisely the point. The book of Esther is a masterful, divinely inspired answer to a question that haunts every single one of us in the quiet moments of our lives. Where is God when He is silent? Where is His hand when all we see is chaos, corruption, and the terrifying machinations of wicked and foolish people? How do you trust in a God you cannot see, in a world that seems to be spinning out of control? This is not just Esther's story. This is our story. We live in a world where God often feels hidden. We navigate workplaces, political landscapes, and personal crises where a miracle seems a million miles away. Answer: the book of Esther is not a fairy tale from a bygone era. It is a survival guide for the believer in a secular world. It's a lesson in learning to see the fingerprints of God on the tapestry of human events, even when His signature is nowhere to be found. It teaches us to see providence in the midst of coincidence, to see divine sovereignty working through human responsibility, and to find courage not in a guarantee of safety, but in a defiant hope that even in the darkest night, God is still at work, weaving His purposes in the shadows. So let's begin. Our story opens in the heart of the Persian Empire, the superpower of the ancient world. We're in the capital city of Susa, in the third year of the reign of a king named Ahasuerus, better known to history by his Greek name, Xerxes. And the first thing the Bible wants us to know about this king is that he is powerful. Incredibly powerful. He reigns over 127 provinces, from India all the way to Ethiopia. The scale is staggering. But the second thing we learn about him, very quickly, is that for all his power, he is profoundly insecure, driven by ego, and a fool for spectacle. The story opens with a party. But this isn't just any party. This is a 180-day-long festival, a 6-month-long display of the vast wealth of his kingdom and the splendor and glory of his majesty. This is a man who needs to show off. He needs constant validation. He is powerful, but he is also fragile. At the climax of this marathon of ego, he throws another 7-day banquet for all the people in the capital. The wine is flowing freely, royal wine in abundance, and everyone can drink as much as they want. It's a scene of unrestrained indulgence. And on the 7th day, when the king is in high spirits from wine, which is a polite way of saying he's drunk, he has a brilliant idea. He decides to summon his queen, Vashti, to come and display her beauty to the people and the nobles, wearing her royal crown. He wants to show her off like she's his most prized possession, the final, ultimate trophy in his collection. And Queen Vashti says no. We don't know why she refuses. Perhaps she felt it was beneath her dignity. Perhaps she refused to be objectified and paraded before a crowd of drunken men. Whatever the reason, her refusal is a stunning act of defiance in a world where the king's word is absolute law. And Xerxes' reaction is telling. He doesn't just get annoyed. He becomes furious and burned with anger. Why? Because his ego has been publicly bruised. His authority has been challenged, and in an honor-shame culture, this is a massive public humiliation. He immediately consults his wise men. But look at the question he asks. He doesn't ask, "How can I be reconciled with my wife?" He asks, according to the law, what must be done to Queen Vashti. His concern is not relational, it's political. And his advisors are just as foolish. One of them, a man named Memucan, gives this incredible speech. He says this isn't just an offense against the king, it's an offense against every husband in Persia. He paints this absurd scenario where all the women in the empire will hear what Vashti did and start disrespecting their own husbands. He predicts mass domestic unrest. It's a ridiculous overreaction, but it plays right into the king's insecurity. So, on this flimsy basis, they issue an irrevocable decree. Vashti is to be deposed, banished from the king's presence forever, and another, better, woman will be chosen to take her place. This whole first chapter seems almost comical, like a political satire. But it's doing something crucial. It's setting the stage. It's establishing the character of this world. It is a world governed by the whims of fragile, drunken men. It's a world where decisions of state are based on bruised egos and absurd logic. It is a world of power without wisdom, of law without justice. It is a world, in short, that desperately needs a savior, but has no idea. And into this chaotic, dysfunctional, godless world, God is about to insert his queen. Chapter 2 opens sometime later. The king's anger has subsided, and he starts thinking about Vashti. Maybe he regrets his hasty decision. His attendants, ever eager to please and perhaps fearful he might change his mind, propose a solution, a kingdom-wide search for a new queen. Let's hold a beauty pageant for the king. Let a search be made for beautiful young virgins for the king, they suggest. Let them be brought to the harem in Susa, put under the care of the eunuch in charge, and go through a year of beauty treatments. And then, the one who pleases the king the most will become queen. Let's be very clear about what this is. This is not a fairy tale contest. This is a brutal system. Young women from all over the empire are to be taken from their homes, many against their will, and brought to the palace. They will spend one night with the king. If they please him, they might become queen. If they don't, they are moved to a second harem, a house of concubines, where they will live out the rest of the days as the king's property, in isolation, unlikely ever to see their families or the king again. This is a story of human trafficking, sanctioned by the state. It is dark, and it is here, in this dark context, that we meet our heroine. Her name is Hadassah, which means myrtle tree in Hebrew. But she goes by a Persian name, Esther, which likely means star. And we learn she is Jewish, an orphan, raised by her older cousin, Mordecai. They are descendants of the tribe of Benjamin, exiles living in a foreign land, a generation or two removed from the destruction of Jerusalem. They are part of a vulnerable minority group. And Esther is beautiful, so beautiful that she gets swept up in this royal dragnet. She is taken into the king's palace and placed in the harem. And here, her cousin Mordecai gives her a crucial instruction. Do not reveal your people or your family background. Hide your Jewishness. This is a point of deep moral ambiguity. Why does he tell her to do this? Is it a shrewd survival tactic in a hostile environment? Almost certainly. Is it also a compromise of her faith, a hiding of her identity as one of God's chosen people? It's hard to see it any other way. Esther is not introduced to us as a bold spiritual giant. She is a passive victim of circumstance, doing what she's told in order to survive. She is beautiful, she is obedient, and she is hidden. And in her hiddenness, she mirrors the hiddenness of God in her story. Esther finds favor with Haggai, the eunuch in charge of the harem. He gives her special food, the best place in the harem, and 7 female attendants. For 12 months, she undergoes the prescribed beauty treatments, 6 months with oil of myrrh, 6 months with perfumes and cosmetics. This is an intense process of assimilation, of being stripped of her old identity and prepared to be an object for the king's pleasure. Finally, her turn comes. She goes into the king. And the text says, she asked for nothing other than what Haggai, the king's eunuch who was in charge of the harem, suggested. This is another sign of her submissive, quiet character. She's not trying to scheme or manipulate. She's simply doing what she's told. And the king loves her. He loves her more than all the other women. He sets the royal crown on her head and makes her queen in place of Vashti. So Esther, the Jewish orphan, the hidden exile, is now the queen of Persia. It seems like a classic rags to riches story. But look at the position she's in. She's the wife of a volatile, foolish tyrant. She's living a lie, her true identity a secret. She is isolated, surrounded by court intrigue. It's a position of immense privilege, but also immense peril. And at this point, neither she nor Mordecai has any idea why she is there. They just know she has survived. Meanwhile, Mordecai sits at the king's gate, a place of official business. He's an administrator of some kind. And while he's there, he overhears 2 of the king's officers plotting to assassinate Xerxes. Mordecai gets word to Esther. Esther tells the king, giving credit to Mordecai, and the plot is foiled. The 2 conspirators are impaled on poles, and the event is recorded in the book of the annals, the official court records, in the king's presence. This seems like a minor detail, a loose thread. But in a story where God is hidden, there are no loose threads. There are only seeds of providence being planted, waiting for the right moment to sprout. Remember this sleepless night and the dusty book of records. It will become the very hinge upon which the fate of an entire nation will turn. And with that, the stage is set. We have a foolish king, a hidden queen, a faithful watchman, and a seed of deliverance planted in the royal archives. The board is arranged. And now, the villain enters. Chapter 3 opens with the words, after these events, King Xerxes promotes a man named Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite. And he elevates him, giving him a seat of honor higher than all the other nobles. The king commands that everyone at the royal gate kneel down and pay honor to Haman. The Bible gives us a very specific detail about Haman. He is an Agagite. This is not just a random piece of trivia. For any Jew reading this story, that word would send a chill down their spine. Agag was the king of the Amalekites, an ancient, sworn enemy of Israel. Centuries earlier, in the book of 1 Samuel, God had commanded King Saul to completely destroy the Amalekites for their treachery against Israel in the wilderness. But Saul disobeyed. He spared King Agag. Eventually, the prophet Samuel had to execute Agag himself. The Amalekites represent a kind of cosmic, generational evil, a force utterly opposed to God and his people. And Haman is a descendant of this royal line. He is the embodiment of that ancient hatred. So now we have a showdown. Haman, the heir of Agag, walks through the king's gate, and everyone bows. Everyone, that is, except Mordecai. Mordecai does not kneel or pay him honor. The text doesn't explicitly say why. Was it because he was a Jew and would only bow to God? Possibly, though bowing to a king was a common custom. Was it because he was from the tribe of Benjamin, the same tribe as King Saul, and he refused to bow to a descendant of his ancestor's nemesis, Agag? This is a very strong possibility. It's a clash of ancient bloodlines. Whatever the reason, Mordecai's defiance is public and absolute. Day after day, the other officials question him. Why do you disobey the king's command? But he refuses to listen. So they go and tell Haman, to see if Mordecai's behavior will be tolerated. And when Haman sees that Mordecai will not bow, the Bible says he was filled with rage. But look at Haman's reaction. It's so disproportionate, so evil. He's not content to just punish Mordecai. The text says, he scorned the idea of killing only Mordecai. Instead, Haman looked for a way to destroy all Mordecai's people, the Jews, throughout the whole kingdom of Xerxes. From one man's perceived slight, Haman concocts a plan for genocide. This is the irrational, all-consuming nature of pure hatred. This is the spirit of Amalek. So Haman begins to plot. He goes to the king. But first, he consults the supernatural. He has the pur, which is the lot, cast in his presence to determine the best day and month to carry out his plan. This is Haman trying to align his wicked scheme with the will of the gods, trying to find a favorable date from fate. The lot falls on the 12th month, the month of Adar. This sets the date for the slaughter almost a year away. Haman thinks he has found a lucky day. What he has actually done is give God's hidden providence an 11-month window to work. The enemy's superstition creates the very space needed for his own undoing. With his date set, Haman goes to the king with a masterful, manipulative speech. He doesn't even name the Jews. He just says, "There is a certain people dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom who keep themselves separate. Their customs are different from those of all other people, and they do not obey the king's laws. It is not in the king's best interest to tolerate them." It is classic rhetoric of hatred. Create an other, accuse them of disloyalty, and frame them as a threat to the state. Then he makes his proposal. He offers to pay 10,000 talents of silver, a colossal, almost unbelievable sum of money, perhaps 2/3 of the entire annual income of the Persian Empire, into the royal treasury to get the job done. This shows the depth of his hatred, but it also cleverly makes it seem like the king will profit from the genocide. And how does the all-powerful King Xerxes respond to this proposal to annihilate an entire ethnic group within his borders? He doesn't ask which people. He doesn't ask for evidence. He doesn't question the morality of it. He simply takes his signet ring, the symbol of his authority, the equivalent of his signature, off his finger and gives it to Haman. "Keep the money," he says, "and do with the people as you see fit." In a moment of thoughtless cruelty, the king signs a death warrant for every Jewish man, woman, and child in his empire. The decree is written, sealed with the king's ring, and sent by couriers to every corner of the empire. The order is chillingly specific: to destroy, kill and annihilate all the Jews, young and old, women and children, on a single day, the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, and to plunder their possessions. The date is set. The law is irrevocable, and the chapter ends with one of the most haunting sentences in the Bible. The king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Susa was bewildered. The architects of genocide share a drink, while confusion and terror begin to spread through the streets. All hope appears to be lost. This is the low point. The plan of the enemy is in motion, sealed with the highest authority in the land. And God is nowhere to be seen. Chapter 4 opens with the response. When Mordecai learns of the decree, he tears his clothes, puts on sackcloth and ashes, the traditional signs of deep mourning and desperation, and wails loudly and bitterly in the city streets. The news spreads, and throughout the provinces, there is great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping and wailing. This is a portrait of utter devastation. Esther, isolated in the palace, hears about Mordecai's behavior from her attendants. At first, she doesn't understand the reason for it. She just knows it's a public disgrace. She sends him clothes to wear, trying to get him to stop his public display of grief. But he refuses. Esther is still living in the bubble of the palace. She is disconnected from the terror facing her people. So she sends a trusted eunuch to find out what is wrong. And Mordecai tells him everything. He tells him about Haman's plot and the exact amount of money he offered. He gives him a copy of the written decree to show to Esther, and he gives her a charge: go into the king's presence to beg for mercy and plead with him for her people. This is the moment everything changes for Esther. The crisis of her people has now landed on her doorstep, and her initial response is one of fear. She sends a message back to Mordecai, reminding him of the law. All the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law: that they be put to death. The only exception is for the one to whom the king extends the golden scepter. But 30 days have passed since I was called to go to the king. She is terrified, and for good reason. She knows the king's volatility. She knows the law is not a suggestion. Going before the king uninvited is a potential death sentence. And the fact she hasn't been summoned for a month suggests she may be falling out of favor. She is weighing her life against Mordecai's request. And then Mordecai sends back his reply. And this speech is the theological heart of the entire book. It is the moment the hidden God speaks, not in a loud voice from heaven, but through the challenging words of a desperate man. First, he shatters her illusion of safety. Do not think that because you are in the king's house you alone of all the Jews will escape. He tells her that her royal position, her assimilation, her hidden identity will not save her. The decree is for all Jews. Her fate is tied to the fate of her people. Then comes the second part, a breathtaking statement of faith in the hidden God. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. Look at that. Mordecai does not know how God will save them, but he is utterly convinced that he will. He believes that God's covenant promises to his people will not be thwarted by a foolish king and a wicked advisor. Deliverance is a certainty. The only question is whether Esther will be the instrument God uses. He is confronting her with the sovereignty of God and her human responsibility all in one breath. God's plan will not fail, but she has a choice whether to participate in it, and there are consequences for her choice. And then comes the famous line, the climax of his challenge. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this? It's a question, not a command. It's a gentle, probing suggestion. Esther, have you ever considered that your whole life, the loss of your parents, your beauty, your being taken into this horrific system, your finding favor with the king, that none of it was an accident? That maybe, just maybe, the hidden hand of God has been orchestrating all these chaotic and painful events to place you, a hidden Jew, in the one position in the entire world that could save our people at this exact moment in history. This question reframes her entire life. It transforms her from a passive victim of fate into a potential agent of divine providence. It gives her suffering a possible purpose. And in this moment, Esther is transformed. The fearful, passive girl dies, and the courageous, decisive queen is born. She sends her final reply to Mordecai, "Go, gather together all the Jews who are in Susa, and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do." She is calling for a corporate act of desperation and dependence, the closest thing to a call to prayer in the entire book. And then she makes her resolve. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. This is not a statement of despair. This is a statement of defiant surrender. It is the cry of someone who has let go of her own survival and entrusted her life to a purpose greater than herself. She is saying, I will do what is right, regardless of the consequences. I will step into my, for such a time as this, moment, and I will leave the outcome in the hands of the hidden God who placed me here. So Esther prepares. But she doesn't just rush in. She formulates a plan. A brilliant, psychologically astute plan. On the third day, she puts on her royal robes and stands in the inner court of the palace, in front of the king's hall. The king is on his throne, and he sees her. And the text says, he was pleased with her and held out to her the golden scepter that was in his hand. She is safe. The first, most dangerous hurdle has been cleared. The king asks her, "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be given you." He is expansive, generous. But Esther doesn't blurt out her plea. That would be premature. She needs to get the king and her enemy in the same room, on her terms. So she makes a simple request. If it pleases the king, let the king, together with Haman, come today to a banquet I have prepared for them. This is genius. She is appealing to the king's love of feasting and flattery. She is also honoring Haman, lulling him into a false sense of security. Haman is summoned, and they go to Esther's banquet. At the feast, The king again asks Esther for her request. And again, she demurs. She's building the suspense. She says, "My petition and my request is this: if the king regards me with favor, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to the banquet I will prepare for them. Then I will answer the king's question." She has now hooked the king's curiosity completely, and she has Haman exactly where she wants him. Haman leaves that first banquet feeling on top of the world. He is happy and in high spirits. He has the king's favor. He's just been to an exclusive banquet with the royal couple, with another one to follow. But then, as he passes the king's gate, he sees Mordecai. And Mordecai still doesn't rise or show him fear. And all of Haman's joy evaporates in an instant. He is filled with rage. His ego is so fragile that one man's defiance can poison his greatest triumph. He goes home and gathers his wife and his friends. He boasts to them about his wealth, his sons, his promotions, and how Queen Esther invited no one but him to her banquet with the king. "But all this gives me no satisfaction," he whines, "as long as I see the Jew Mordecai sitting at the king's gate." His wife, Zeresh, and his friends have a solution. Have a pole set up, reaching a height of 50 cubits, about 75 feet high, and in the morning ask the king to have Mordecai impaled on it. Then go cheerfully with the king to the banquet. Haman loves this idea. It appeals to his sense of drama and public vengeance. So he has the massive gallows built, ready for the morning. The stage is now set for the final act. Esther has her plan. Haman has his gallows. Mordecai's life hangs by a thread. The fate of the Jews seems sealed. Everything depends on what happens tomorrow. But God is a God who works in the night. Chapter 6 opens with one of the greatest understatements in all of literature. That night, the king could not sleep. Why couldn't he sleep? Was it the wine? Was it anxiety? The text doesn't say, but the believer knows. The hidden God is at work. The insomnia of a pagan king is about to become the salvation of God's people. So, to pass the time, the king commands that the book of the Chronicles, the official records of his reign, be brought and read to him. What are the odds? A sleepless night, a request for a dusty, boring book of records. And what page does the attendant just happen to open it to? The page that records how Mordecai the Jew had exposed the assassination plot of the two guards. The king asks, "What honor and recognition has Mordecai received for this?" And his attendants reply, "Nothing has been done for him." The king, who lives by a code of honor and reward, sees a debt has gone unpaid. At that very moment, just as the king is wondering how to honor Mordecai, who should appear in the outer court. Haman, why is he there so early? He has come to ask the king's permission to impale Mordecai on the gallows he just built. The timing is so perfect, so exquisite, it can only be described as divine irony. The king calls Haman in. Before Haman can make his morbid request, the king asks him a question: what should be done for the man the king delights to honor? Haman's ego is so immense, he can't imagine the king would want to honor anyone but him. So he lets his imagination run wild. He designs the most extravagant public ceremony he can think of. "Let them bring a royal robe the king has worn," he says, "and a horse the king has ridden, one with a royal crest placed on its head. Then let the robe and horse be entrusted to one of the king's most noble princes. Let him robe the man the king delights to honor, and lead him on the horse through the city streets, proclaiming before him, 'This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor.'" The king listens to this elaborate proposal and says, "Go at once. Get the robe and the horse and do just as you have suggested for Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Do not neglect anything you have recommended." Can you imagine the horror dawning on Haman's face? The man he came to kill, he must now honor, in the very manner he himself designed. The humiliation is absolute. So Haman has to take the robe and the horse, find Mordecai, dress him up, and lead him through the city, shouting out a proclamation of Mordecai's greatness. After the parade is over, Mordecai simply goes back to his post at the king's gate, his demeanor unchanged. But Haman rushes home, his head covered in grief and shame, his world crumbling around him. He tells his wife and friends what happened, and his wife, who just the night before had suggested the gallows, now offers a chilling prophecy: since Mordecai, before whom your downfall has started, is of Jewish origin, you cannot stand against him. You will surely come to ruin. Even the pagans can see the tide has turned. And while they are still talking, the king's eunuchs arrive to hurry Haman along to Esther's second banquet. He has no time to process his humiliation. He must go and face the queen. The king, Esther, and Haman are at the banquet table. For the third time, the king asks, "Queen Esther, what is your petition?" "It will be given you." "What is your request?" "Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted." The time for subtlety is over. The moment has come. Esther takes a deep breath and lays her life on the line. "If I have found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my petition. And spare my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed and annihilated." She has identified herself with her people. The secret is out. She is a Jew. The king is shocked, confused. Who is he? Where is he? The man who has dared to do such a thing? And Esther looks directly at her enemy and delivers the fatal blow. An adversary and enemy. This vile Haman. The atmosphere in the room changes in an instant. Haman is terrified. The king, enraged, gets up and storms out into the palace garden to process this. He has been tricked. His own favorite advisor has plotted to kill his own queen. Haman, knowing he is doomed, stays behind and falls on the couch where Esther is reclining, begging for his life. At that exact moment, the king re-enters the room. And what he sees is his wicked advisor in a compromising position with his wife. He misinterprets Haman's desperate plea as an assault. "Will he even molest the queen while she is with me in the house?" The king roars. That is the final nail in Haman's coffin. As soon as the words leave the king's mouth, the guards cover Haman's face, a sign of condemnation. And then, another one of those coincidences. Harbona, one of the eunuchs, speaks up. A pole reaching to a height of 50 cubits stands by Haman's house. He had it set up for Mordecai, who spoke up to help the king. The king's response is swift and poetic. "Impale him on it." So Haman is executed on the very gallows he had built for Mordecai. The great reversal is complete. The enemy has been ensnared in his own trap. The hidden God has turned the tables. But the story is not over. Haman is dead, but his decree is not. The law of the Medes and Persians is irrevocable. The date for the slaughter of the Jews is still on the calendar. So on that same day, the king gives Haman's estate to Esther, and Mordecai is brought before the king. Esther tells the king of their relationship, and the king takes off his signet ring, the one he had given to Haman, and gives it to Mordecai. Power has changed hands. Esther again approaches the king, weeping. She begs him to put an end to the evil plan. The king extends the scepter, and she pleads for him to revoke the dispatches that Haman sent. But the king explains the problem. No document written in the king's name and sealed with his ring can be revoked. So, they devise another brilliant plan. They cannot revoke the old law, but they can write a new one to counteract it. The king tells Esther and Mordecai, "Write another decree in the king's name in behalf of the Jews as seems best to you, and seal it with the king's signet ring." So Mordecai summons the royal secretaries. A new decree is written. It doesn't cancel the first one, but it grants the Jews in every city the right to assemble and protect themselves, to destroy, kill and annihilate any armed force of any nationality or province that might attack them and their women and children, and to plunder the property of their enemies. It gives them the legal right to self-defense. This new decree is rushed by couriers on the fastest horses to all 127 provinces. And the effect is immediate. For the Jews it was a time of happiness and joy, gladness and honor. And many people of other nationalities, seeing that the tide had turned and the Jews now had the king's favor, became Jews because fear of the Jews had seized them. Finally, the fateful day arrives, the 13th of Adar, the day Haman had chosen for the destruction. And because of the new decree, What was meant to be a day of slaughter becomes a day of victory. The Jews assemble and defend themselves against those who had intended to harm them. No one could stand against them. Even the provincial officials, fearing Mordecai, who was now the second most powerful man in the empire, helped the Jews. They struck down their enemies. The next day, they rested. And Mordecai and Esther establish a new festival to be celebrated every year in commemoration of these events. They call it Purim, named after the pur, the lot that Haman had cast to determine their fate. It is to be a time of feasting and joy, of sending presents of food to one another and gifts to the poor. It is a festival celebrating the great reversal, how God turned their sorrow into joy, their mourning into a day of celebration. It is a holiday dedicated to remembering the salvation of the hidden God. The book ends by telling us that Mordecai the Jew was second in rank to King Xerxes, preeminent among the Jews and held in high esteem by his many fellow Jews, because he worked for the good of his people and spoke up for the welfare of all the Jews. What a story! A story that begins in the chaos of a pagan court ends with God's people safe and their leader in a position of power and influence. And it all happened without a single overt miracle. It happened through the sleepless night of a pagan king, the pride of a wicked man, the courage of a young woman, the loyalty of a faithful cousin, and a series of coincidences, so perfectly timed that they shout the name of the God who is never mentioned. The book of Esther is our book. It is for those of us who live in a world that feels more like Susa than Jerusalem. It is for us when we feel like exiles, when our faith must be lived out in secular spaces, when the wicked seem to prosper and God seems silent. It teaches us that God's providence is not always spectacular. More often, it is subtle. It is woven into the fabric of ordinary, messy human life. It works through flawed and frightened people who dare to take a risk for a purpose greater than themselves. It teaches us that our own story, with all its strange twists and turns, its pain and its confusion, may be the very stage upon which God is placing us, for such a time as this. It challenges us to look at our world, not with fear, but with eyes of faith, searching for the fingerprints of the hidden God who is always at work, turning the tables on evil, weaving light into the darkness, and working all things together for the good of those who love him, and for the glory of his own great name. Even, and especially, when that name is